sort of reception you get walking the halls of the Knesset as Ofer Cassif from your colleagues, and how do you think this attempt to silence you reflects the kind of broader shift in the political climate within Israel since October the 7th?
First of all, all right. Sorry. Where is it? All right. First of all, I would like to thank you so very much for your warm welcome. Really appreciate it. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. Believe me that I will not get such a welcome there. Of course, with my comrades I will, but otherwise not so much. So really, thank you so much. I would like to begin with your permission with something that perhaps, I don't know, perhaps you're aware of, perhaps not, but I think that's the basis to understand what's going on now in Israel. And this is something that is called the decisive or subjugation plan. This plan was published in 2017 by now a Minister of Finance and Minister within the Ministry of Defense, Bezalel Smotrich. Smotrich, to those who are lucky not to heard about him, is a racial supremacist. He's not only a fascist, he's literally a racial supremacist. Just to give you one example, before I gloss into the decisive plan, he, for instance, a few years ago, insisted that his wife should not give birth or to stay after giving birth in a hospital in a room with another woman. He's now, a minister, a senior minister. By the way, he's in charge of the settlements in the West Bank, which, as I said yesterday to some friends, it's like nominating Oswald Mosley to be in charge of racial equality. So, or Enoch Powell, if you like me to be more modest. So, he published this plan, which has basic three components. First, I remind you again that it was 7 years ago. First, that Israel must annex the occupied Palestinian territories without granting basic civil, political, and other rights to the Palestinians, which obviously means official apartheid on top of the practical that already exists. Second, those Palestinians who are not going to accept their status as subjects rather than citizens are going to be expelled from their homeland. And thirdly, those Palestinians who are going to resist are going to be killed. Now, why do I mention something that seems to be prehistoric? Because that's the real reason of the ongoing genocide now. The genocide that the government of Israel has been launching in the last year, to which I shall refer in a second again, and some other crimes I shall specify in a second too. Those have nothing to do with the security of the Israelis or the state of Israel or the Israeli society or the Jews. Nothing at all. They couldn't care less about the security of Jews. Look at the lot of the hostages. They've been sacrificed by the Israeli government. Knowingly. You probably followed also the forged documents that were lately revealed that actually seemingly prove that Netanyahu was involved in forging those documents in order to justify the sacrifice of those hostages. And by the way, Israeli soldiers as well. They are sent there as cannon fodder on the altar of the survival of the government, nothing to do with security or let alone the well-being of Israelis. The 7th of October, the massacre, another, I want to be very blunt, the massacre committed by Hamas is also a war crime and crime against humanity that should not be tolerated whatsoever. That was our stance of the Communist Party in Hadash from the day one. By the way, we lost not few supporters there that were killed, including a good friend of mine who was killed with her husband minutes after she texted me from her security room in one of the kibbutzim there. But it's not a personal issue, it's a moral and ideological issue. We oppose this carnage because it was criminal and wrong, full stop. And we also said, and re-emphasized ever since, that even the worst crimes committed by the occupation for decades cannot justify the massacre committed by Hamas. By the same token, we've been saying time and time again, that the massacre committed by Hamas cannot justify the ongoing genocide committed by Israel. That's, if you like, our internationalist, socialist stance. We are not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. For me, that is the meaning of being a humanist. And as a socialist, I truly believe that socialism is humanism. Yeah. So, I would like to say something about the genocide. The genocide that goes on in Gaza is not only the incredible death toll of innocent Palestinians. We are dealing now with more than 50,000, among which almost 20,000 are children. Children, not minors under 18, children. And of course women, including pregnant ones. Many families were entirely wiped out. And of course, and more than 70% of those who were killed up till now are innocent civilians. More than 70%. If that's not genocide, I do not know what genocide is. But it's not only the death toll, and by the way, according to different, documents that I read by the United Nations and some other organizations, like by organizations of doctors, around the globe who are engaged in human rights, etc., like Doctors Without Frontiers or Borders. They think that eventually there are going to be 186,000 dead. It's not only the bombs and the shooting. And by the way, there's a document of a human rights organization of doctors who say that were in Gaza and say that they saw in person children who were shot point blank by snipers. But it's not only the death toll, but it is also, the thousands and thousands of innocent civilians, again, especially children, who lost limbs. Yeah. Not to mention that traumatized. It's the domicile, the total destruction. Gaza Strip is under rubble. Altogether. Starvation. There is an intentional starvation by the Israeli government, of course under the auspices and support of Biden's administration. So, and of course, no water, no medicine. All hospitals that were in Gaza Strip were destroyed. Medical crews were killed, teachers, academics, educational institutions were wiped out. And that's the tip of the iceberg. So I'm asking, how can anyone say there is no genocide going on in Gaza? And I want to remind you that part of my suspension is because I dare say that there is a genocide going on. It's forbidden to use the term at the Knesset. So, but under the smoke screen of Gaza, and you refer to it, there's also an ongoing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Since October 7, 23, or first, almost 1,000 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank. Again, many children. More than 20 communities, especially of shepherds, were perished because of violence of armed settlers with the support of the occupation forces. More than 20 communities. In South Lebanon, 40 villages do not exist anymore. 40 villages simply disappeared, as it were. And that's only I said the tip of the iceberg, just a bit of the crimes that the Israeli government is responsible for. And it couldn't happen without the silent and active support of the vaguely said international community, particularly Biden's administration, the government of Britain, the government of Germany, and many others. That couldn't happen. When my family was killed by the Nazis 80 years ago, the world was silent. And it comes again. It is repeated. Perhaps in that sense, Marx says a very famous statement that history repeats itself once as a tragedy and the second as a farce. I think that perhaps he was wrong because sometimes both times are tragedies, as we can see now. And this is unacceptable, my friends. It's intolerable. And if there's something that drives me crazy on top of the madness I already mentioned, is the total silence in Israel. Bloody hell, forgive me. The people that suffer throughout the century so much from persecution and pogroms and the Holocaust, you of all, I would not expect any human being, of course, to be engaged in such terrible crimes, let alone someone who knows the history of one's own people. How can you? How can you not only shut up, but persecute those who raise a voice? I'm not talking just about myself, I'm talking about anyone who raises a voice. Even before that, people who raise a voice against the crimes of the occupation, including Jews who are not living in Israel, like Noam Chomsky, for instance, or Norman Finkelstein and others, were persona non grata in Israel, They could not enter. I said that before in an interview, I repeat it, that if one hand in Israel is responsible for killing, the other hand is, located over our mouth, so we won't reveal those crimes. We have to shout it out loud. We are forbidden to shut up, whatever the cost is. Because if we shut up, it will be even worse. It can be worse. Now, I would like to say a few more words about what's going on within Israel proper. Because this is the other side of the equation. Israel is now turning from an ethnocracy, because it was never really a democracy. It was always an ethnocracy. That means a regime in which there are basic individual rights to everybody, to all the citizens, with institutionalization of supremacy of one ethnic group. That's the basis of Israel. Let's be blunt about it. But now Israel is turning. That's the master plan. And that's part of this decisive plan as well. Is turning into a full-fledged fascist dictatorship. there is an ongoing systematic persecution of anyone who raises a voice against the genocide, and even if it's against the government within Israel. Primarily Palestinian citizens. 20-21% of the citizenry in Israel are Palestinians. They've been victimized since the Nakba, of course, like all the people, the Palestinian people. But now they are under a systematic persecution by the Israeli government and by the so-called police, which has turned months ago into a private militia of the government, specifically of Benfires. They act as if they were a private militia. They do not serve the people, they serve the government and its own interests, and primarily of Benfires himself. So the persecution is primarily of the Palestinian citizens. They are arrested, fired from their workplaces, thrown out of the universities and colleges only because if they dare tweeting or posting against the genocide or expressing sympathy for the victims of the genocide. And I'll give you one example. There are, believe me, thousands. A Palestinian teacher from the north of Israel, not very far from the city of Haifa, posted last year on TikTok a dance. She was dancing, posted it. Now, a year after, it was automatically reloaded on TikTok with the date. The date was 7th of October, accidentally. She was arrested the same day as if she celebrated the massacre by Hamas. She was taken from her home by a bunch of police officers, blindfolded. Her hands were cut and also her feet. She was humiliated a few days in a detainee camp. When she was brought in front of a judge, because after a while they ought to, she was immediately released with no charges, no nothing, because it was obvious that there was nothing there. And she was, by the way, arrested by a direct order from Benfir, which is, by the way, against the law in Israel. But there is no law anymore in Israel. Like there was never a law in the Palestinian occupied territories, now it penetrated into Israel itself. There's no law in Israel. The same militia called police, by the way, refrained from stopping and thereafter arresting a mob that invaded a military basis in order to attack military policemen who came to arrest soldiers who were suspects in sodomizing Palestinian detainees. And there are thousands of stories like that. It's not exceptional. Now the persecution is not only, this is just a few examples. The persecution is also of democratic or progressive Jews and others. A friend of mine, Meir's name, a teacher for 40 years in Israel, just posted last year names and photos and ages of children who were killed by Israel in Gaza. Because in Israel they have no identities, they are not human beings. They're only numbers. He was immediately fired by the school for that, nothing else. Because he posted those details, the mayor of the city prohibited him from teaching all around the city. The Minister of Education revoked his teaching license, so he couldn't teach at all. And if that's not enough, he was arrested, accused in treason. By the way, he was arrested, accused in treason, not in incitement, because in order to arrest someone in charge of incitement, there must be a confirmation by the Attorney General. In order to avoid it, because the police knew they would not get the confirmation, they accused him in treason because in such a charge there is no need to get confirmation from the Attorney General. He was 4 days in security prison. I mean security as a security prisoner. He was detained 23 hours a day, confined to his cell, 1 hour alone, because he was supposedly a security risk. 1 hour alone per day he could go out to walk. He couldn't get books, change clothes. After 4 days again, they had to bring him in front of a judge, who immediately released him, because saying there was nothing to charge him for. He's been suing the state, the police, etc. Already won some of those cases. He sued, and believe me, there are thousands of cases similar to those. That's what's going on in Israel. To conclude, because I'm already, over 20 minutes, so another one thing that is very important for me to say. There's a list of more than 100 bills initiated by the government, and by the way, I said something about that too, so a bit more. Initiated by the government to abolish totally the basic civil rights in Israel, and to erase any kind of, shred of democracy that was there perhaps. More than 100. Some of them already turned into laws, already passed. For instance, it is now allowed, it is amendment that was accepted by the Knesset about 2-3 weeks ago, it is now allowed to put in prison minors under the age of 14 if they were convicted in any kind of involvement in terror, provided they are Palestinians. That's one law that already passed. Another law now forces schools to fire teachers who are suspect in supporting terrorism, but the one who actually has the authority to force or to order those schools to fire teachers is the minister. No hearing, no judicial involvement. That means, of course, that the minister can say that if you support a Palestinian state, you support terrorism, so you must be fired. And if the school doesn't, comply, the law says, it's all in the law. The law says that the state will cut its budget. Now, there's another law that is now a bill in discussion. It's going to pass in the next few weeks, perhaps next week, perhaps the week after, and that's probably the most dangerous law that is going to be passed. Of course, I said there are more than 100. There's this specific law, which I urge you all to do whatever you can at your disposal to help us in struggling against this law. Because this law is intended to prohibit the Arab parties and Hadash from participating in the elections in the future. Under the guise of fighting terrorism, of course. That means if this law, or when this law passes, because it will, it has a majority, not only by the fascists, by the way. The great alternative to Netanyahu, Benjamin Gantz, doesn't oppose it. So, if it passes, that means that 20% of the population in Israel, of the citizenry, will not have the ability to vote for their representatives as they see fit. The only democracy in the Middle East. So, I truly ask you to do whatever you can in order to help us in fighting off this law and the situation in general. And so I finish here. Thank you very much. First of all, you're totally right, as a matter of fact, because the media in Israel, especially the television, and the radio, and also the printed newspapers, apart from Haaretz, don't show anything about the ongoing in Gaza. Nothing at all. Nobody, assuming that people do not follow alternatives, like the social network and the foreign, media, etc., they don't know about what's going on in Gaza. The media is complicit to those atrocities, totally. Totally. You can also count on one hand how many individual journalists do refer to what's going on in Gaza. And the main reason, there are two main reasons as far as I know, as I think. One is that the vast majority of those who are in the media, like the vast majority of the people in Israel, do not accept or cannot accept any criticism of the Israeli government. That's what I said before about the ICC and the arrest warrants against Gallant and Netanyahu, which in my view are too little and too late, but hopefully it will spread, is part of the reaction. The reaction to those warrants, not only by the so-called opposition, Yair Lapid, Benjamin Gantz, and even Yair Golan, who is the chair of the so-called the Democrats Party, which is Labour and Meretz, even him went yesterday against the decision by the ICC, together with Golan and Benjamin Gantz, accusing the ICC in anti-Semitism. Now, as far as I know, Hadash was the only party that publicly published a welcome to this decision of ICCs. So, the same is the media. The media doesn't want to criticize the government as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned. It may be very critical of the government in regard to other questions, but not as far as the issue of the Palestinians is concerned in general, and in particular the ongoing in Gaza. Many of them simply do not want to believe or don't believe that there's something wrong. The right of Israel to defend itself. Some of the journalists are opportunistic. And they don't want to be fired, they want to be, boycotted by government agencies. For instance, the government boycotts now the Haaretz newspaper. It cancelled all subscriptions and connection with Haaretz because the publisher of Haaretz, as you know, was very frank and honest to say what has to be said about Gaza. And other journalists are simply cowards. The media, if there are three main elements upon whom I put the blame for the ongoing genocide, is, of course, first and foremost the government, secondly, the international community, or those elements, to be more precise, who support Israel, or at least are silent on that matter. I said before and I say again, especially the United States. And third, the Israeli media. Those are the main ones. You asked another thing, I think, that I forgot.
No, I think.
The media?
Yeah.
One thing I think it is. There is no opposition in the parliament, that's true, apart from us. I already referred to that and I gave you examples. There is an opposition on the streets. Hundreds and thousands of Israelis do take the streets, not only, which I welcome, we are part of it, not only in opposition to the genocide because of the fate of the hostages, but also because they oppose the genocide as is. There are many Jews, Palestinians, others, not enough. Many people are afraid because there is a lot of violence by the police against the demonstrators, including, by the way, against the families of the hostages. They are beaten, arrested, driven by horses. So people are afraid. And people, as I said before, are also afraid of losing their jobs. Because if they are, pictured in demonstrations. But I assure you, there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who do share more or less our views and stance regarding the genocide. But unfortunately, that opposition is not translated into parliamentarian opposition, as I said before.
And I'm curious about, because you talk about this street movement that perhaps isn't preoccupied with opposing what's going on in Gaza out of concern for the Palestinians, although clearly that's an element of it. Part of it is, as I understand it, support for retrieving the hostages. And I understand that with these ICC warrants, they faced opposition from the centre-left parties. But I'm wondering whether you're at all optimistic that the result of the ICC warrants and other forms of international pressure might expand the parts of the street movement and the opposition that's mobilizing in a way that grows the opposition to what's going on in Gaza because of Israel's increasing isolation. And I guess whether there's a chance that that popularity at the street level will eventually be converted into more parliamentary seats for Hadash or even for Meretz, and whether you're optimistic about that.
Look, as a Marxist, I very often say, I think I said that before to someone who interviewed me here just before our discussion, that as a Marxist, one of my favorite sayings was by the Italian Marxist philosopher and politician Antonio Gramsci, and he said that a good socialist must be a pessimist of the intellect and an optimist of the will. So I'm very hard trying, to follow him. Not always successfully, but I'm trying at least. So I must say that I am optimistic as far as the long run is concerned. I'm very pessimistic as far as the short run is concerned, because I'm truly afraid, that a lot of blood is still going to be spilled before we succeed in our struggle. And by the way, I'm terrified of a civil war. I think that it's just a matter of time before the militia called the Israeli police and some other armed militias that were armed by Ben-Gvir directly and are just waiting for the D-Day. I'm truly afraid that it's just a matter of time before they are beginning to target us in the streets and homes of Israel. If that police didn't assist, as I said before, those soldiers who were in need in front of the mob, why should they come and assist someone like me if the mob comes to my home? They would probably won't. They probably won't. So that's in the short run. I'm not very optimistic, to say the least. I am in the long run, because there are many layers to this optimism of mine. First, I think that the ICC decision from yesterday is a game changer. Perhaps you do not sense it yet, perhaps not tomorrow. It is a game changer, partly, by the way, because Netanyahu is a real paranoid. He's terrified. He actually published yesterday a video of his talking against the decision of the ICC. If one had the chance to look at it, I do not recommend you to look at him, but if you happen to. So it was very obvious that this man is on the brink of a nervous breakdown. I wish it would happen soon, but it's quite clear. It's quite clear to me. He's terrified. That is going to be, in my view, a game changer, assuming that the states, those 124 states, respect the decision. I mean, we already heard some that are not going to respect it, like Schulz of Germany already said that they won't. Orban of Hungary, the first thing he did after ICC, issued those warrants is to invite Netanyahu to visit Budapest. So, I do think, but and it may pave the way to many more decisions, not necessarily by the Hague, but by different governments and organizations that may change it. Because look, we all know that South Africa that the apartheid collapsed in South Africa partly because of international pressure and economic crisis. And I need not tell you that the Israeli economy is much smaller than South Africa's. So if more and more companies stop trading with Israel, for instance, eventually, and by the way, there are already a crisis in the Israeli economy because the, how do you call it? I forgot the word. Sorry?
Currency?
Not a currency. I'll remember later. Sorry. For a second, rule it out. But there are already decisions that are influential they influence the Israeli economy. And it's very clear that sooner or later, probably sooner, that people will begin to feel it. At the moment, they feel it less. Once they feel it more, it will take toll. It will influence how people treat the government. There are many other reasons. You know, the north of Israel is totally evacuated. People cannot go back to their lands, to work their lands, to their houses. Today, just a couple of hours before our meeting, a missile, from Lebanon fell on one of the most crowded and central cities not far from Tel Aviv, and caused a quite big fire, So all those together will eventually influence how long the Israeli society, including those who support the genocide and even support Netanyahu and the right wing, how long do you think they are going to live like that? Not forever. History shows, theories as well, but primarily history shows that the public opinion may shift very rapidly, in matters of days sometimes. So in that sense, I think there is this kind, I call it the trinity, that if there is more pressure from the international community, more pressure from within the Israeli society, and at last real opposition within the Knesset, if those three, and one influences the other, the interconnection between those, once this trinity materialized, everything is going to change. So in that sense, in the long run, I am optimistic. We do our share. We continue to do our share with all the difficulties. Because we are persecuted mainly, by the way, Hadash specifically, is more persecuted by other organizations or parties because we are an Arab-Palestinian-Jewish partnership. If they are terrified of anything, the fascists and their collaborators, before being afraid of the Palestinian resistance, they are afraid of Palestinian-Jewish partnership. That's the reason we are mainly targeted before anyone else. They could shut down our club a few months ago for 10 hours to prevent us from screening a film and holding a political event. They are terrified. And I finish really. We succeeded, Hadash, the Communist Party, with other more than 60 human rights, anti-occupation, anti-genocide organizations to form a coalition, more than 60 organizations and movements, Jews and Palestinians together. We formed a coalition against the genocide, and it is very active, very successful, and I'm sure we're going to grow stronger.
We need some long-term optimism to comfort us in the short term. I'm going to open it.
First is a total liberation of the Palestinian people in the occupied territories. That means
an independent, sovereign Palestinian state in all territories Israel occupied in June 1967, that is to say, East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza Strip. The second is democratization of Israel proper. So the state will treat the Palestinian citizens equally without any kind of discrimination. Because it does discriminate against the Palestinian citizens within Israel. So a just peace necessitates those two. Now, I would like to tell you a very short story, not more than 15 minutes. Yeah? I happened to have a meeting many years ago, before I was at the Knesset. I think it was 10, perhaps even more years ago. I had two meetings. One was with Bassam Salahi, who is the General Secretary of the Palestinian People's Party, ex-Communist Party. The other was with Naif Khawatme, who is the Secretary of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now, in the first meeting I had with Bassam Salahi, my friend, we said, look, we, the communists, always, the Palestinian communists, always supported the two-state solution. But if upon consent, both sides agree, after the independence of Palestinians, to transform it into one state, or federation, or confederation, or what the heck, so be it. Naif Khawatme said, you know, we at the Democratic Front always supported the one-state solution. But we came to the conclusion that we must pass through a phase of two states. I adopted them both. I personally have no problem as a matter of ideology with one state. But I must admit that it's impossible. It will be counterproductive. Everybody is going to lose because of the circumstances. Not because a theory or an abstract idea or something like that. Under the circumstances of more than 100 years of hostility, occupation, dispossession, oppression, genocide, it can't be that the two peoples can immediately in one day we live together on equal footing. So two states is in my view, is the only viable and realistic and as just as possible solution. But again, as both leaders I mentioned said, if upon consent of everybody is involved, after the experience of two neighboring states, there is a will to transform it into another, to live together at a common roof one way or another, obviously I won't object. As to the other question, Marxist to Marxist, obviously I'm very suspicious towards those international institutions. So I'm also suspicious towards the bourgeois parliament. But I know that it is better to have a bourgeois parliament than one dictator. So same here. I do have my suspicions towards, the ICC, the ICJ, others. By the way, I totally accept the idea they are hypocritical. If they weren't, the first one to be judged in The Hague was Biden. Yes. And before him, of course, many others. Kissinger, the list is very, very, very long list, primarily, American figures. So I do accept that, I know that. But if I have to choose between no institutions at all, so the whole world will be even more like a jungle, and comply with those institutions to make, let's put it like that as a metaphor, to make the jungle less noisy, so I'll pick up the second. I hope I answered. As to the question regarding fascism, be my guest, my friend. I totally endorse what you said. Yes, said that to your own government, said that to others. Israel is becoming a fascist state. Opposing the government of Israel is not only saving the lives of millions of Palestinians, it's also saving the lives of millions of Jews who live there. Absolutely. That's something that should be said. By the way, it will also be helpful in explaining, or if you want to say, to remove the mask of those criminals who accuse us in anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism. Because they are the ones who actually sacrifice not only the Palestinians, but also the Jews who live in Israel. They sacrifice them. By saying that Israel is on the brink of a total fascism, you actually, remove the mask from them, and you actually show that those who oppose the Israeli government are not anti-Semites. Quite the contrary. They care about the well-being of Palestinians and Jews alike. So I totally support what you said.
Thank you. I'm Deanna. I'm wondering how you would advise me or any of us here to speak in a supportive way with our friends, relatives in Israel. I'm sure that's the case for some people here. I lived in Israel for 11 years. I'm still in touch with some of my friends there. My relatives are right-wing and religious, so I don't think I can support them. But my friends, I would like to. It's difficult to know because on the one hand they're terrified, on the other hand they are aware of the fascist government there. So do you have any advice, please?
I wish you could give me.
Well, you don't want me. Give up now.
Hello, my name's Craig from Namod. Couple of questions. You met Corbyn this week, or this weekend. You met Corbyn this weekend, a fellow traveller who was treated as disgraceful in our parliament as yours, so I hope that gave you some inspiration. On Monday, me and some others here went to the High Court, or the Appeal Court, and campaigned against the arbitrator taking the UK government to court. The defence of the UK government was that it would upset the Americans if we stopped selling bombs to Israel. In case you didn't know. The changes in what's happening in Israel is also happening here. There are environmentalists and Palestinian activists that are also being arrested and charged under the Terrorism Act, which is utterly shameful. I'm a school teacher. I teach history in a secondary school, and some of my colleagues, for example, on Friday, she was taken aside, a headscarf, a Muslim woman, and she was told that she looked particularly happy that day. Was it because Netanyahu was asked to go to the ICCJ? So this is happening here too for my Muslim comrades and colleagues in our secondary and primary schools, and it's scary. Marilyn Monroe said that nationalism stops us thinking. How can we make...
That's what?
Marilyn Monroe said nationalism stops people thinking. How can we help each side think?
Ah, right, okay.
We'll take a question back there.
Hello. What was your name, Green? Yeah. I'm happy you said that because I have exactly the same question. I grew up in Israel. I'm a teacher as well. I'm struggling to navigate the difficult conversation with my family who live in Israel. Both my brothers served in the army, one in Lebanon, one in Gaza. They're not willing to listen to me. If they see anything about pro-Palestine, they are incredibly angry with me. They argue with me that the occupation is not true and confuse anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. The common answer is don't be naive, don't believe in peace. They want to kill us all. We must protect ourselves. Really difficult. Thank you.
Let's take one more question, just with the gentleman here.
But there's also a terrible culture of silence in this country. Yes. I can say that. I mean, I can just say, I'd like to say that I've had a rather difficult correspondence with, email correspondence with somebody I know moderately well, called Rabbi Julian Neuberger, who pronounces on every single ethical issue in this country in the House of Lords. But when I asked her to sort of say something about the terrible situation, that has developed in the last year and a half, or whatever it is, she only says, and she deliberately uses this word, I can only be silent, and I refuse to be anything else. So we've had about 6 emails between ourselves, and it is kind of interesting to me that she works in the House of Lords of this country. It is a great figure of the establishment, which to some degree I am as well, for various reasons. She says, I can only be silent, I do not wish to split my community, is the word she uses, which I think is rather terrifying. The other thing, if I may make a comment, to what extent do you think that because, the Holocaust put Jews in the world of the last sort of 80 years or whatever it is, into a kind of, gave them a kind of moral position in the world. And I think what's happened in the last year and a half or whatever it is has completely sacrificed that. Do you agree?
Summarising this question. So I think we had two a little bit similar questions, so we will combine that into one, and I think that's how to communicate with relatives and loved ones in Israel to try and shift their...
Okay. First of all, I was not totally joking when I said that please advise me what to do regarding that. We've been all facing that, unfortunately. After October 7th, there was a wave in Israel of people who were supposedly leftists and anti-occupation before, who suddenly found, suddenly became sober, as it were, and realized that actually there was now no one to speak to, that all Palestinians are alike, no innocence in Gaza. I personally lost some friends over that in Israel. There are people that literally we don't speak since. And I agree that nationalism, shuts our heads very often. And following what the friend said before, and so it is much easier on the Israeli government to mobilize our support within Israel and outside of Israel by using October 7th massacre, that I was very clear about its condemnation. Use it as a guise to mobilize people to support them and their agenda. Now, I am far from having a kind of a magic trick, how to change it, how to win back our perhaps even collaborators or allies, politically speaking, let alone families. What I do try to do by myself, I cannot recommend it, as a magic trick, as I said. That's what I'm trying to do. First of all, is to give concrete examples of Palestinians who are for peace, who do oppose what happened on October 7th, who do seek real, lives together with Jews and with Israelis, and even the Israeli state. One example that you may use, because I think it's a very tragic, painful example, and I'm talking about a very good friend of mine, I'm proud to call him a friend. Perhaps you heard of Dr. Azzedine Abu El-Ayash. Dr. Azzedine Abu El-Ayash was originally from Jabalia refugee camp, the ex-refugee camp that was almost wiped out totally now by Israel, in Gaza. In one of former assaults by Israel on Gaza, a direct missile hit his house and killed 3 of his daughters and another niece. And it was, by the way, live on telly, because he gave a call to a journalist who was accidentally at the same time in the studio of one of the Israeli channels. And he didn't know that it was live. It was accidental. And he was shouting, they killed them, they killed 3 daughters. Now, he told me, he lost another 30 members of his extended family in Gaza. This man is a doctor, an MD. He left Gaza after the catastrophe, after the tragedy he experienced. He's been living ever since in Canada, working as a MD. And
He published a book after he lost his 3 daughters. He published a book entitled I Shall Not Hate. He still clings to those ideas and values of his. He refuses to hate Israel, let alone Jews, because of even after the tragedy he went through. He's not the only one. The generalization is the basis of racism. Whatever kind of generalization and racism we talk about. When you hate Jews, you first have to generalize. To say they are all Scrooge or something like that. The hate is only the second stage. First you generalize, thereafter you build the hatred upon the generalization. So what's the difference here? When one says they all want to kill us, this is the very same generalization that we as Jews have been suffering from for ages. They actually replicate one field to another. I think that should be said. Obviously, it's different from one individual to another. Some may be attentive, some may not. But I think this is something that should be said, not only instrumentally, in order to win them back, as it were. But that's the truth. This is something that we have to say. Another thing is that, and I think I said that before, that on top of our opposition to the genocide, because it's criminal, because it's wrong, to say the least, it is also the interest of Israel itself to finish it, to end that genocide, to live upon the sword, to kill and be killed. That is the interest of the Israelis. The parents in Israel wanted their children to be killed forever. Don't they understand that that's exactly what they are doing by preserving that situation? I think that should be sound, I think one has to be totally blind, brainwashed to ignore that. And I do not say that it's going to be successful. As I said, it's very difficult for me too to say that to friends, even to family. But I think that there's no other choice. And I think that to be truthful is a value. I will never lie in order to win someone to my side. Perhaps I'm naive, I don't know. But I think that to be truthful, even in that dire situation, I think that's the right and the best thing to do.
And essential.
I agree.
Nationalism stopping us from thinking, and I wonder if you're putting back your Marxist hat on, might help you elaborate on that question.
I recommend you to read my PhD, then you get the answer. One volume is on the web, the other is not. So just start with the first one. But I agree with you. I mean, everything that I was talking about generalization of people, but same about generalization of actually it's part of it. Generalization, us and them, Pink Floyd. There is a song by Pink Floyd, us and them. But after all, we are all ordinary men. That's what Roger Waters wrote. So I think he was right. So nationalism. There was a Marxist here before, I don't see her, so, false consciousness. Nationalism has been used by ruling classes to mobilize the proletariat on their own side. And so I hope that everybody is attentive to some Marxist preaching. So, but I believe that's true. It does serve, the ruling classes, the powerful, and because of that, it's more often than not, it's so difficult to tackle it and to confront it. But I do agree with you that it does shut people's heads, and that's part of the problem we addressed before. That people do not want to hear us very often, because when we talk now about, peace and Palestinian liberation, etc., etc. Yeah, I agree.
The final question here about the role of the Holocaust in the way in which people outside of Israel and Palestine view the conduct of Israel, and whether that's an appropriate way to, or a helpful way to.
I don't know if you followed. I don't even remember if I mentioned it before. Perhaps I did. One of the judges that was involved in the decision of the ICC yesterday is an Holocaust survivor. He's 94, 95 years old. He's a Holocaust survivor. Not only that, he was the Israeli ambassador to Canada a few decades ago. And he was himself, as a Jewish Holocaust survivor, in the team that eventually led to the decision to issue those arrest warrants. And you are, I guess that most of you are from England, from here. You probably remember Gerald Kaufman.
Yes, we love him.
There was a lord whose name I cannot remember, because perhaps you can remind me, which I really adored and admired. He died a long time ago. He himself was a Holocaust survivor. And as I remember that he once said, perhaps even in the House of Lords, he said, I or my parents did not survive Auschwitz in order to do the same to the Palestinians. And now, he said so, and you may endorse the comparison, you may not, that's not the point. The point is that the Israeli government tries to, take monopoly over not only the suffering of Jews across the generations and the world, but also over the Holocaust. Who keep them the monopoly over the Holocaust? Who? I mean, I less, care or heard or feel for the Holocaust survivors than them. Actually, I think that I more, that I care more about the Holocaust survivors and feel deep inside the sorrow and pain for the victims of racism and of the Holocaust. They should not be given the right to claim monopoly. They've been the most vicious ones in manipulating and abuse the memory of the Holocaust, because they've been using it cynically to their own political ends. What's more malicious than that? So I think that we should not be, in a kind of defensive vis-a-vis the Israeli government that manipulates and uses cynically the Holocaust. We should be the offensive side to attack them for that. By the way, the place on earth for Holocaust survivors, the worst place on earth for Holocaust survivors to live is Israel. You know that there was, I could not call it a wave, but there was, a phenomenon of Holocaust survivors who immigrated from Israel to Germany, because there they can get subsidized and, assistance in regard to medicine, accommodation, etc., that they cannot get in Israel. Before they speak in the Israeli government and parliament at large about the memory of Holocaust survivors, about the well-being, before they do that, take care of their lives. Don't abuse them. I remember one Holocaust survivor, there was a film, a doco, many years ago, directed by two journalists in Israel, regarding the situation of Holocaust survivors in Israel. And, including, of course, interviews. I will never forget that woman. Unfortunately, I cannot remember her name, and she died, alas. She said, and I quote, this is not something I invented, and I would not even say that, even if I thought that, if she wouldn't say. And she said, Hitler killed us rapidly, the government of Israel kills us slowly. So before the government, any government, takes that monopoly over the survivors of the Holocaust, treat them well, and don't be hypocritical.
We've already run over a little bit, so unfortunately I'm going to bring this discussion to a close, but incredibly
Grateful for all the questions, and incredibly grateful to you, Ofer, for your time, for speaking.